I studied psychology and philosophy at university, and I was especially interested in the psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, especially an idea that Jung has, which is the idea of the collective unconscious. Because, how can civilizations that never really met each other or have very different cultural aspects can end up having the same spiritual messages? For me, this really speaks to a certain transcendence of those ideas in terms of morality and in terms of spiritual worldview. I really wanted to show this in the exhibition, and I wanted to show this through a parallel between Greek mythology and the Bible. Christ and Persephone are the centerpieces of the exhibition, and the reason for that is because they are both symbols of the archetype of the self.
In Jung's mind, the self is the state of being that all humans strive for. It is an apex of completeness and unity. It is achieved by integrating unconscious contents into consciousness. The archetype of the self is best described as the most developed being one could be. It represents our true and complete personality. Jung believed that the various representations of deities in mythologies and religions are actually symbolic manifestations of the archetype of the self.
This archetype of the self is symbolized through cultures, and it's basically what cultures worship, and they worship the symbols because that's what they want to become.
In the Western world, the archetype of the self is commonly found in the symbol of Jesus Christ. The reason why Christ has been so greatly worshipped throughout 2,000 years is because people are drawn by the archetype of the self residing in him. In other words, people recognize the person they want to be in the figure of Christ. This is because Christ himself attained his innermost being. Just as individuals have to confront their own darkness and the horrors of the world, Christ had to do the same by descending into hell. It is only after his descent into the darkness that Christ was able to ascend into the light. Christ represents a unity of a divine nature. He embodies the union of opposites.
Psychologically, there is this notion of integrating the darkness of the world and of yourself, and it is by integrating this darkness then you can give dimension to your being, dimension to your light. This is a perfect story for a symbol of the self because it's a story of individuation, of becoming your innermost being. So like Christ, Persephone is also a symbol of the self, because in the same way that Christ had to descend into hell in order to ascend into the light, so did Persephone.
Like Christ, the Greek goddess of the underworld symbolizes self-realization through the union of opposites, which is why the exhibition presents the spiritual parallel between the two. In the same way that Christ confronts the darkness of the world, Persephone also descends into hell when she's abducted by Hades, the god of the underworld. Persephone's descent into hell symbolizes the confrontation with the darkness of the world. Following a deal with Hades, Persephone is then able to ascend to the light and join her mother Demeter as a more complete and unified being. Persephone was a symbol of the archetype of the self for the ancient Greeks, as she embodied the union of opposites. This spiritual transformation undergone by Persephone was worshipped by the ancient Greeks in the form of a popular initiation rite known as the Eleusinian Mysteries. The Eleusinian Mysteries were considered as the most sacred institution of the ancient Western world. The ritual was a mystical ceremony which facilitated the self-realization of the initiates. Interestingly, the most important part of the ritual was the reenactment of Persephone's ascension. This is because her ascension symbolizes the union of darkness and light, or in other words, the ultimate self-realization.
So in order to have a very powerful symbolic imagery
of Christ and Persephone's ascension, I thought, what if we could send the paintings into space and have a literal reenactment of their ascension? Well, that's exactly what we did.
So, right, we've got our spacecraft here that are going to carry the paintings on their journey into space. Beautiful. Both kind of side by side. They're identical apart from some slight differences because of the balancing of the painting. Then, as you'll see here, Ollie's just setting up the first kind of flight train. So attached to the top of this craft, we're going to have our separate tracking system here. This reflective shape here just lets aircraft know. It makes it very visible on radar.
Oh, great.
Then we have the parachute that once the balloon that carries this into space bursts, is going to bring it back down nice and safely.
Of course. Amazing.
And we know where it's going to land to within a couple of 100 meters at this point, thanks to the weather prediction. So we know what's going on in the stratosphere. Take weather data from across the world and kind of use that to make a climate simulation model. The craft itself is built around presenting the painting. So it's a kind of lightweight framework. It's made of carbon fiber, so we want it to be as lightweight as possible. So if you feel that,
Of course.
you know, we're stripping out as much weight as possible, keeping it nice and lightweight, so we can get as high as possible for that kind of beautiful view. So we have on board our camera systems here. So we've got two cameras that are both kind of thermally regulated to make sure that they perform throughout the flight. And this gives us, you know, a backup just in case there is a power fault or anything. Power supplies, independent power supplies for each battery will be in here, and then we're going to have a kind of supportive tracker here that kind of works in tandem with our primary tracking system that will be slightly further up. So we have radio communication and satellite communication with the craft at all times, so that we make sure we know exactly where it is. And then we can update our flight path simulations as it's traveling through the air as well. When we're launching something into space, there's always risks to consider, and our job is about narrowing down what we know and making sure that it's as safe as possible. So that of course we get the paintings back in a beautiful state.
Yes, absolutely. But also, you know, if because I have been told that there might be some scratches or something depending on where it lands.
It's a possibility. If we come down in a massive tree or like tumble into a river.
But you know, in a way, it will be a token of the amazing journey.
Absolutely, yeah. It becomes part of the story of the artwork.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's quite an intense environment, so we're going to be above 99.5% of the gas that makes up our atmosphere. So the pressure is going to be close to zero, and that means that the temperature as well is going to be as low as kind of minus 65 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
So the cameras are going to be working extra hard. They've got kind of heating elements embedded in them. We've done some stuff to the firmware as well.
Incredible.
And that's why we're supplying them with separate power as well, because the internal batteries just won't process fast enough to give it the power that it needs. It'll be bright as well up there.
Yeah.
So down here on the ground, you know, even though it's a nice sunny day here, quite a bit of the sun's light is being scattered as it passes through the atmosphere. As we get higher up, there's no atmosphere to perform that scattering effect. So our cameras have to be optimized for incredibly bright conditions as well. But that should make the paintings really shine.
So I'm really, really looking forward to see how it's going to look like.
Well, excellent. So are we. So we're just setting up the tracking system that you can hear screeching in the background. That's our radio tracker being set up. And then once all of the electronics are ready to go, we can start filling the balloon that's going to carry the craft.
The painting of Christ was painted by the very talented Elizabeth Scogland. Elizabeth created an impactful depiction of the crucifixion, inspired by old master paintings.
But also there is a contemporary touch to it. If you see closely, the face of Christ is a bit blurred and kind of like the physical getting metaphysical in some sense. We really wanted to have, first of all, Christ, but in the cross. Why the cross? The cross is a symbol of the union of opposites, you know, and this is also why it's a symbol of the self. The cross is a horizontal and vertical line coming together, representing the union of opposites, representing the union of darkness and light.
In the book of Revelation, Jesus says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end."
This really marks, again, this union of opposites and the completeness that Jesus embodies. And what you can see in the painting is that there is the Alpha and the Omega, really enhancing this idea.
The painting of Persephone was painted by the marvelous artist Ekaterina Savchenko. Ekaterina has painted Persephone in several of her artworks, but we chose this one as it truly symbolizes Persephone's ascension. We also chose this painting because the colors perfectly melt into the scenery of space.
But also Persephone in her image comes out as a celebration of life. You know, her hands are up in the air, her hair is, you know, floating, and the celebration of life is really transcribed through the transformation that Persephone underwent.
So we're using hydrogen gas. It's the lightest element in the universe, and that's going to provide our lift force. And the balloon itself, you know, we might be familiar with with coloured party balloons. This is a very kind of thin, stretchy, undyed latex. So it's firstly, it's a completely natural resource. It is biodegradable. So and there's no kind of toxic components to it. So we're calculating the exact amount of gas that we need to put into the balloon, and we're going to measure that by hanging one of these ballast weights off it. So once we have enough gas in the balloon to lift this and kind of have it float at neutral buoyancy, we have the right amount of gas to lift our craft at our kind of target speed.
Approximately to what altitude are they going to be?
We're predicting travelling to about 35.5 kilometres. You know, we'll be above, as I said, 99 point something% of the atmosphere. We'll be able to see the blackness of space very clearly above, and the curvature of the Earth. When we look at the horizon, we'll be able to see that thin glow, that kind of ribbon of blue that is our atmosphere, and the light shining through it. You know, we look up and see a massive blue sky, but from above, that's a very fine kind of band of atmosphere that separates us from space.
In both the story of Christ and Persephone, the descent into hell represents the surrender of the old self, and the subsequent ascension symbolizes the emergence of a new, transformed self. It is by confronting the darkness within and around you that, like Christ and Persephone, you can become a more fulfilled individual and thus ascend to the light. This is actually the first time since the New Testament was written that the symbol of Christ literally ascends into the heavens.
We could not foresee how the scenery was going to look like when the paintings reached space, but we truly had a surprise for both of them. For the Ascension of Christ, the sun rays illuminate and pierce the painting, giving a magnificent divine light.
This is also the first time since the Eleusinian Mysteries that the Ascension of Persephone is literally reenacted.
For the Ascension of Persephone, the painting was perfectly aligned with the curvature of the earth, giving the impression that Persephone is genuinely ascending towards the sun.